You know, much as I hate to give Thomas J. Doyle too much credit, he might have gotten a hold of something when he said that was pretty private stuff going on out there. I wonder if it's ethical to watch a man with binoculars and a long focus lens. Do you suppose it's ethical even if you prove that he didn't commit a crime?
I'm going to stop you right there, Jeff. Yes. The answer to that question is yes. Unless... and welcome to the Cinema Psych podcast where psychology meets film. And in today's episode, we're going to go back 70 years. Yeah, that's right. We're going all the way back to 1954's Rear Window. Rear Window, Alfred Hitchcock. It's going to be a good one. All right, so if you're not familiar with Rear Window, where have you been? Now, granted, this was the first time that I have actually seen Rear Window, and part of the reason, so I'm going to be totally honest with you all, part of the reason was the pacing in the first, I want to say 30 minutes to an hour is really tough to get through, and I had read about those kinds of things, and I struggled with, do I want to devote the first hour to maybe not being fully engaged? So there I am starting with you at the front here. So be completely honest with you, the second hour, way better. And of course, what you end up getting is a complete movie, a complete story that is, on the AFI's 100-year, 100-movie list. It was ranked number 42 on the first list. Then it was ranked number 48 on the 10th anniversary list. So in 1997, 42, and then it fell 6 places for the 2007 version of the AFI 100 Years, 100 Movies. Still on the list, still top 50. So there you go. It's also in the National Film Registry in the Library of Congress for being culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant. There are lots of things that we are going to talk about in this. And of course, we are not going to get through everything that could possibly be discussed with this movie. Now, again, Alfred Hitchcock directed this movie, and it was written by John Michael Hayes, and Hayes based it on Cornell Woolrich's 1942 short story, It Had to Be Murder. And it's very interesting that this was not a stage play before, because you could see it totally being a stage play then that got converted to a motion picture release. The film stars James Stewart, Jimmy, as L.B. Jeff Jeffries. He's a photographer who is laid up with a broken leg, massive broken leg. He's got an immovable cast from mid-thigh, almost top of the thigh, down to his foot. Grace Kelly plays his girlfriend, socialite Lisa Fremont, and Wendell Corey plays NYPD detective Tom J. Doyle, a war buddy of Jeff. Thelma Ritter plays Stella, Jeff's daily nurse. Man, he spends his days just staring out this rear window, right? Raymond Burr is Lars Thorwald. the antagonist of the film, although you don't really know he's the antagonist. Sorry, spoiler alert, the film's been out for 70 years, until the end of the movie. Few other actors are in there, a lot of uncredited folks that either have lines said from a distance, or you can't really tell the kinds of lines that they have. So Judith Evelyn, for example, plays Miss Lonely Hearts, and this is a woman on the second floor of Thorwald's building. On the first floor, Thorwald's on the second floor, and she's just not having any good luck with men, right? So not only did Alfred Hitchcock direct the movie, he also produced it. It got released by Paramount. It's just one of those movies that, and I'm a little embarrassed to say that, 2024 was the first time that I've seen it, but I will say I saw it for the 70th anniversary. How about that? It's been around for 70 years. And this is the first time that Stewart and Hitchcock worked together. They will work together again in other great films such as Vertigo. Okay, so enough of the background here, because the background is actually, more of the background is actually going to get interwoven in our discussion of the film, because it's hard to talk about this movie without bringing in like the real life behind the scenes kind of stuff and who the people are. Stewart, Hitchcock, Grace Kelly, all of these folks, and how they put this film together with the content and the acting of the movie, really kind of just bring it all together. So let's jump right into it. My guest host today is Dr. Jane Halonen. She's been teaching for 43 years at West Florida University. She's also the past president of STP at one time. And she wants you all to know probably the coolest thing about her is the fact that the Early Career Award for STP, that's the Society for the Teaching of Psychology, is named in her honor. And she thinks it's a very big personal deal to be so recognized. I agree. Jane, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you. I'm so glad to be here.
Now, Jane, please tell us how you and I met.
Well, I believe we met in connection with what's called Top Inc., which is a brainstorm that Garth Neufeld and Eric Landrum came up with a few years ago to help people get some crazy ideas and figure out how to make them real. So I don't know if you were in the first class of Top Inc. or one of the later classes. We've done it a couple times.
Yeah, I think the more recent one in Pittsburgh.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting to see the kinds of diverse ideas that people bring to that.
Indeed.
Because it's ranged everything from camps for kids to the podcast series that you're talking about to trying to craft a particular kind of article. And basically the people who host it, we're thinking on our feet all the time about how do you make connections? How do you empower people to do what they do?
Right.
But mostly, how do you support the big dream to help that happen? So when something like yours happens and it becomes such a big hit, I mean, we feel like we've got little thumbprints on what you've done.
I love it.
It's very exciting for us.
Yeah. And the very cool thing, this is just breaking as of today. So Jane, you're one of the first people to actually hear about this, but the database site that is, I guess, affectionately called, has an acronym of Merlot, the wine variation. It's a bunch of digital resources for online classes, but also, to use in traditional classes as well, is going to post the podcast as a resource for educators.
Oh, that's excellent.
After a peer review of 3 reviewers. I had no idea this was happening. Somebody submitted the podcast in 2021, and last year it went under peer review. Again, I had no idea this was happening. So yeah, as you're saying, it's really interesting that, things can snowball in really wonderful ways.
Well, it starts out as just a little inkling of, wouldn't it be cool if we did
Yeah.
X? And then I think the fun of Top Inc. is you just throw fuel on the fire and watch everybody get excited and support everyone else's ideas.
Yeah, and I think the great thing for me was just hearing other people give me input.
Yeah.
Right. And I think everyone else in that group just felt very supported, not only by you and Garth as like the runners of that workshop, but like everyone else who was just participating had no idea what anybody else's projects were, but we had a really good time that morning. And so I definitely had a wonderful time. And so I'm happy to have you on. Now, you are on because I asked you after you emailed me a plea. Yes. What was that plea?
What did I email you?
This was a list of films that have been on the podcast. That's right.
I did email you that because I do teach a class, a capstone course that's called Psychology in the Movies. And awesome. I was wondering if there was an easy way to kind of navigate the website to help students develop ideas about how psychology and the film industry intersect.
Yeah.
Yes,
and so it was a great plea, and it's something that I am working on as one of those things that requires, like, it's got to be a low priority because it's a new skill that I need to incorporate, and I got to find the time for it. So that might be a winter thing that I'm looking for. But what your email did do was prompt me to make sure that the letterbox list that I keep for the podcast is constantly updated. So I do have to add some films to that and add this one to it as well. With the goal to do exactly what you were requesting, which was to make the website a little bit more navigable. And interestingly enough, one of the concerns in the Merlot peer review was it's basically a keyword search base, and everything is obviously presented via the date that it's published, which are valid concerns. They're super helpful for me to move the site forward. So I appreciate your email, and it got you on the show. So I think it's a win-win for everyone, right?
Yes.
So let's pivot to the movie Rear Window. So I wanted to get your sense of your thoughts in general about the movie before we jump into any psychology stuff. Things like directing, acting, the plot, the pacing, all of that stuff. What are your thoughts on Rear Window 70 years later?
I have opinions on all of that, so it's really good.
Go for it.
That you laid it out that way. The reason I chose Rear Window among all the films that I watch and love is it is a film that I use in my capstone class, but it has so many distinguishing features, not just because it illustrates so many important psychology concepts, but because it had a record-breakingly large set on the Paramount
wild
lot.
Set.
It had perfectly cast characters. It had interesting music. It had a real sense of claustrophobia that developed. There were just so many interesting things about it. And if you throw in the whack job director, what more could you ask for if you're a psychologist? There's just so much to explore in the film.
I agree. The first thing that I noticed about the movie, so just to repeat for you what I said in the intro, was that this was the first time I've seen the movie. And I like to say I waited to watch the movie for its 70th anniversary. Oh. And the interesting thing is I was looking at the Wikipedia entry for the movie. It came out on August 4th, 1954. Which was only a few weeks ago, and wide release on September 1st. So yeah, I really did watch it for its 70th anniversary.
Okay.
Embarrassingly so, but still.
Did you like it?
Yes, I did. though the first hour of the movie was a little slow.
Mm-hmm.
And that was part of the reason why I put it off for so long.
Okay.
So I appreciate you not necessarily forcing me to watch it,
Well,
but
yeah, I
giving me
sort
a
of
good
did.
reason.
Yeah, I sort of did force you to watch it. by
I mean, if
picking
you
Yeah.
get down to brass tacks, yes, it was a force. But so after that first hour, though, I was all in, absolutely. But when I first watched, watching the intro shot, and it really just the camera panning around through all the various windows, very well done with the use of the camera work and of course, the Hitchcock close-ups, the tightness of the set. I've never lived in a place that was so densely populated like New York City. But I felt like I was there, and I was like, ooh, this is a little too close. I don't know if I could do this.
I think that was part of the genius of the film, is that you did feel like you were there. You almost felt like you were sweating.
Yes.
Because the context was so hot and people were outside because they were trying to cool off. And the use of the camera to try to capture, are you looking at it straight out or are you looking at it through a lens, made it even more intimate and creepy. And so I think that was a really good choice that they made.
Yeah, I agree. And the hot thing is interesting because we're in a heat wave right now in the middle of the country. We have a dome coming in from the desert, a heat dome. And so, yeah, I really felt it. And I felt so bad for people in that time. So not even just the movie, but people in that time. I'm sure it was hot on set with the lights and everything, but they didn't have air conditioning. And when you had heat waves, that was the only thing you could do, is have the windows open and maybe a fan here or there. The dinner party toward the end of the film, and more people just kept piling into that piano player's apartment. I was like, oh my God, too many bodies in there. Luckily it was at night, but holy moly, there were way too many people.
That sort of captures New York life.
I think it does. Yes, absolutely.
Living conditions are so contained. And I think that was really well captured in the film.
I agree. It was a wonderfully done film, and I think it's probably one of Hitchcock's most well-regarded films, other than maybe Vertigo or Psycho.
Okay, so I've got opinions about those.
Okay, go for it.
Because I do also watch Psycho in my movies class, and have discovered that when I'm teaching Psycho to Gen Z students in particular, they find it silly. They don't find it horrifying. And they say things like, I just don't get black and white films. And the category of the black and white film, they dismiss that entirely because obviously that has no value. So the kind of, let's just say, movie appreciation skills that I'm trying to teach on top of teaching psychology through movies, it is fascinating to see the generational differences.
Absolutely have had similar reactions with black and white film.
Yeah.
And it's a bit too bad in my view, but I do understand that, well, can't we just watch it in color? Can't they just colorize it? Can't they?
Yeah. Yeah. Let's colorize it. Wouldn't that be?
Then you could tell that it's not actually blood, right? It was chocolate syrup or whatever. So yes, no, we can't just colorize it, children. We can't do that. It's
a fascinating thing, trying to help students understand the artistry that can happen in black and white. I was just making a point. I think it was just last week when my class convened, we watched Casablanca, and none of them had seen Casablanca. It's like, how could you not see what's regarded as the #1 movie of all times in American production, Casablanca? Well, no, and besides, it's black and white, so, it's kind of boring. So in my class, one of the things I ask students to do is work in teams to review the film and then give me feedback on how they would change it if it were going to be redone. And of course, where Casablanca is concerned, I say, please don't recommend that we ever redo that one. I can't imagine
Right?
anyone doing
No
that
remake.
better. No remake possible. And then, of course, they have to apply psych concepts to what they're watching. And so I'm proud that by the end of the course, students' tastes are broadened, but they also look at movies in a very different way, which is the point of the experience.
The New York State sentence for a peeping Tom is 6 months in the workhouse.
Oh, hello, Stella.
They got no windows in the workhouse. You know, in the old days, they used to put your eyes out with a red-hot poker. Any of those bikini bombshells you're always watching worth a red-hot poker? Oh, dear. We become a race of peeping Toms. What people ought to do is get outside their own house and look in for a change. Yes, sir. How's that for a bit of homespun philosophy?
Reader's Digest, April 1939.
Well, I only quote from the best.
Oh, you don't have to take my temperature this morning.
Quiet. See if you can break 100. You know, I should have been a gypsy fortune teller instead of an insurance company nurse. I got a nose for trouble. Can smell it 10 miles away. You heard of that market crash in 29? I predicted that.
Oh, just how did you do that stuff?
Oh, simple. I was nursing a director of General Motors. Kidney ailment, they said. Nerves, I said. Then I asked myself, what's General Motors got to be nervous about? Overproduction, I says. Collapse. When General Motors has to go to the bathroom 10 times a day, the whole country's ready to let go.
Oh, Stella, in economics, a kidney ailment has no relationship with the stock market, none whatsoever.
Crashed, didn't it? I can smell trouble right here in this apartment. First you smash your leg, then you get to looking out the window, see things you shouldn't see. Trouble. I can see you in court now, surrounded by a bunch of lawyers in double-breasted suits.
Well, okay, back to Hitchcock and his films. Psycho is, I think, a well-done film, and it's the one that put Hitchcock on the map. But I think Rear Window is more artistically accomplished and better acted. And I thought Vertigo was a complete mess of a movie. I don't like it at all. I find it painful to sit through. And all three of those made it to the American Film Institute's best of the best list.
Yeah, that's very true. It's on both of them.
Yep.
And yes, Rear Window is top 50. Vertigo is bottom 50. I get it.
Yeah.
I get it. I think Vertigo has some pacing problems too, and this just might be an overall Hitchcock issue. But now that I've seen Rear Window, I think I agree with you. However, I will have to say that as we move on from other Hitchcock films, North by Northwest is my favorite Hitchcock film.
That would be a close second for me.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Fair enough.
That's a good
Fair
one.
enough. I mean, I'm a sucker for some Cary Grant. So not to say that I'm not a sucker for some Stewart, some James Stewart, but you know, I have to draw the line there.
I understand.
So moving into some of the psychological concepts, and maybe to preface this, Jane, you could tell us a little about why you've incorporated into your psych and film class.
I use it primarily because it's written about in the textbook that I use.
Okay.
I use a textbook called Psychology of Moviegoing by Ashton Trice. And
I'm familiar.
It's a lovely little book that does exactly what I need for the time frame that I have with students. So in my capstone class, I'm responsible for the first half of the class, walking through the textbook to illustrate how movies influence us, how psych concepts feed into how we create movies, what kind of personalities are drawn to what kinds of movies, because what I'm trying to do is help students see all kinds of angles related to what psychology connections can be made to movies. Yeah. And then students in genre teams, I assign them to specific genres to pool their resources. They have to come up with their own questions and try to develop a position that they have to present both in writing and speaking. And so, at least in our capstone design at UWF, we have all kinds of thematic approaches. Basically, we let professors talk about what they love, as long as psychology is integral to that. And then students have to do a writing and a speaking project, as well as map out where they're going after graduation with our help. So
Okay.
it's a lovely, complex thing that, thank God, my department signed on to when I proposed it. And so we
All
have
right. Well, I'm
a
going to have
lovely
to
assortment of
grab
things.
your argument and
Uh-huh.
use it at my school.
Yep.
Because that sounds like fun.
It's a lot of fun. I have to say it's a lot of work because I tell students, this is finishing school. You've been through all of psychology.
Mhm.
You've endured all the crap that people have said to you about how stupid you are being a psych major. We're going to teach you how to defend against those microaggressive comments for the rest of your life. And we're going to get you ready so that you don't come to my office the week before graduation and say, now, what about this job search thing? That I want you to be not a dumbass psych major, but I want you to be an ambassador for psychology because we need all the help we can get.
I love it.
Yeah.
So Rear Window is in this textbook, and I would imagine we're going to hit on some of the topics today in our discussion here. So there's a great middle of the film scene where it's maybe sort of middle end, sort of the bridge between Act 2 and Act 3, I suppose, where Lisa and Jeff are watching Miss Lonely Hearts down on the first floor of Thorwald's apartment. And she gets into a small altercation with a dude who probably went a little bit too far.
Correct.
And they have this conversation about the ethics of watching.
Much as I hate to give Thomas J. Doyle too much credit, he might have gotten a hold of something when he said that was pretty private stuff going on out there. I wonder if it's ethical to watch a man with binoculars and a long focus lens. Do you suppose it's ethical even if you prove that he didn't commit a crime?
I'm not much on Rear Window ethics.
Of course, they can do the same thing to me, watch me like a bug under a glass if they want to.
Jeff, if someone came in here, they wouldn't believe what they'd see.
What?
You and me with long faces, plunged into despair because we find out a man didn't kill his wife. We're two of the most frightening ghouls I've ever known. You'd think we could be a little bit happy that the poor woman is alive and well. Whatever happened to that old saying, love thy neighbor?
I think I'll start reviving that tomorrow. I'll begin with Miss Torso.
Not if I have to move into an apartment across the way and do the dance of the seven veils every hour. Show's over for tonight. Preview of coming attractions. Did Mr. Doyle think I stole this case?
No, Lisa, I don't think he did.
So I think it's important as pretty much the main plot driver of Rear Window is to talk about what Jeff is doing for the majority of the film, and that is watching people. Voyeurism.
It's all he can do. He has a broken leg.
I mean, he could do other
photographer
things.
But
I think he is maybe on the verge of it being a problem, a clinical problem.
Well, I wonder how biased that might be from the standpoint of the richness of things that we have at our hands in 2024.
Sure, yes.
Right? So if we think about the 1950s, which I'm familiar with, since that was my era, things were kind of boring. So, television, maybe in 1954, there might have been a couple channels that signed off at 10 o'clock at night. And we don't have the endless kinds of entertainment options that we currently have.
Very true. That's very true.
So
he could have read a book, I suppose.
He could have, but he's a man of action.
Yes.
And he's a man of action who's now deprived because he's got a broken leg.
And I don't think it's on accident that the short story and Hitchcock's version has the character as a photographer. captures people for a living.
He does
Captures
capture
events.
people, right?
Yeah.
And now the irony is he's captured.
He's captured, and so he still needs to scratch that itch.
He does. And it's funny you should say that, since I think one of the more fun scenes is when he's trying to scratch under his cast.
Yes.
And has such great facial expression. I think one of the things I love about the film is Stewart is acting from the waist up.
Oh, yeah.
Throughout this film. That's all he can do. And yet, because of the skill, you really resonate with what he's feeling. It's one of the reasons that you get sucked in to being a voyeur along with him.
Yeah. By the second hour, you are as sucked in, just like I was. I feel like I was in the apartment with Jeff and Lisa. Not only did he suck her into his suspicions, but he sucked Stella, his nurse, he sucked her in, and he sucks the audience in.
Yes.
And I think part of the brilliance of the pacing, now this is, you could argue this, of course, but I think the brilliance of the pacing, however slow it was, we were just feeling how hot, bored, and miserable Jeff was.
Well, I think that's also highlighted by the conversation that Jeff and Lisa have about their relationship on the front end. It's very protracted.
So that's it. You won't stay here, and I can't go with you.
It would be the wrong thing.
You don't think either one of us could ever change?
Right now, it doesn't seem so.
I'm in love with you. I don't care what you do for a living. I'd just like to be part of it somehow. It's deflating to find out the only way I can be part of it is to take out a subscription to your magazine. I guess I'm not the girl I thought I was.
No, there's nothing wrong with you, Lisa. You've got this town in the palm of your hand.
Not quite, it seems. Goodbye, Jeff.
Well, you mean good night?
I mean what I said.
Well, Lisa, couldn't we just keep things status quo?
Without any future?
Well, when am I going to see you again?
Not for a long time. At least, not until tomorrow night.
And you kind of feel trapped watching this couple not being able to negotiate how to be together. So almost every aspect in that front is designed to make you feel, oh, I just feel really constrained by what I'm watching. I thought that was especially well done. And
Stella I think Stella the nurse plays a role in that too, by trying to get Jeff to have this conversation with Lisa. Like,
she's constantly prodding him.
Yeah.
Prodding him to settle down with the right girl.
Right. So this aspect of voyeurism, would you consider Jeff's voyeurism of his courtyard to be just a curious guy? Let him just watch. He's bored. He's miserable. He's laid up. Or does it reach the point of, as their conversation goes that I mentioned just a few minutes ago, border on the unethical? Is he prying?
Is he prying? I think yes, he is prying.
Mm-hmm.
I think it is, again, because he's dying for something to do. And so he's creating for himself something to do. It happens that what he created for himself was accurate, but it could have gone an entirely different way. And I think that entertaining that he could be wrong is sort of the function that Stella plays.
Right.
And I do love the character that Thelma Ritter plays in this. And I've observed over time, I'm a fan of hers. She plays the same character in every film she ever does. It's the wisecracking woman who knows better than anybody else.
Yeah.
And the nice part in this film is that she got sucked in. She was the voice of reason in the front end, but it didn't take too long before she's right in there trying to dig up things and create trouble.
So it's prying, and I think we'll agree that it's prying. And yes, he does conjure up the suspicion that ultimately he's vindicated about.
Yes.
But of course, you don't know it as you go. Like Doyle, the detective, tries to throw a wet blanket on them, and Jeff isn't. I think he entertains it for a fraction of a second, but he is still deep within
He's all
it.
in.
Yeah.
He's all in.
And
Yeah,
and at that point too, Lisa's all in. Stella is mostly in, I would say. So the question that I have for you is it really voyeurism as a sexual term?
Okay, so I'm going to say, if it isn't, it sure flirts with it.
If it isn't, it sure flirts. Okay.
Yeah, because his most treasured scrutiny is Miss Torso. I think that's the first person that he spends some time on.
Mm-hmm.
He looks a little, I believe the word is lascivious when he's looking at her.
Yep.
His gaze lingers there. He comes back to her more than he sees anyone else. And because she's engaged in gymnastics and moving around in provocative ways and butt wagging, obviously he's engaged in that.
Yeah.
Now, what I love about that particular element is, okay, it's kind of human and represents some stereotypes that we think about the male gaze that has become so prominent in feminist literature. But when Doyle arrives and starts to have that same, ooh, look at that woman over there, Jeff gives him crap. Like, that's inappropriate. So even there, he's able to divorce his looking at it. We see the look on his face. We know it's kind of sexualized.
Yeah.
But he sees it when he sees Doyle do it. And he also confronts Doyle with it, which I thought it's just so subtle, but it's such a nice touch.
I agree. And I want to add what appears to be a newlywed couple off to his, I guess, his left of his rear window. And he's constantly looking over there to see if he can catch a glimpse.
Something going on
over there, right? And then to make matters more interesting, as you said, when he catches Doyle lingering on Torso, when Doyle spots the nightgown of Lisa because she plans to stay the evening, he tells it's 2 or 3 times, I think, something like that. He says to Doyle, "Be careful.
Careful, Tom."
Right? Don't get the wrong idea about this. And one of the things that I thought of with this element of voyeurism is I think Jeff might also be just sexually frustrated.
Okay.
How long do they say? So he says another week, but how long has he been laid up prior to that? Do they say it in the movie?
I think it was 6 weeks.
6 weeks.
Yeah.
So he has like 7 or 8 weeks of total like being in this wheelchair, laid up, can't do anything, and a previous 6 weeks where he can't really do anything with Lisa.
Correct.
So I feel like that is all to set up he's sexually frustrated. Now, does that indicate a pattern? Well, it's hard to know because, right, we only spend a few days with these characters and they're trying to play as much as possible with all of the visuals. But I did catch that. Like, he's been in that wheelchair for a long time, and maybe he hasn't done anything with Lisa at all. Maybe they're, waiting till marriage or anything like that.
Oh, I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, go for it.
Because the assumption here is that they would be functioning again like 2024 couples where, is it a third date tryst or is it a first night hookup?
Yeah.
And in the 50s, there may have been third date trysts and first night hookups, but not in the movies. The movies were much more pristine and moral. And so I think the implication back then was they haven't married yet. Maybe they haven't even gotten around to consummating whatever is going on.
Yes, that thought also crossed
weird.
My mind.
Yeah, and hard to entertain given how standards have changed. It's like,
yes,
she's gorgeous. He's a regular human male. What's going on here? But if you factor in, it was the 50s when people believed Americans didn't have sex unless they had gotten married, which was bogus.
Right. And I would like to think that Hitchcock played a little fast and loose with those rules. Obviously, he had to play by them to get his movie distributed, right? But there was no MPAA that existed. There was no ratings, but there was this code that had to be followed. So I'm hoping that he was a little fast and loose, and his suggestion was that maybe they've had sex before, but haven't had it for a while, and maybe Jeff doesn't want to continue because he doesn't know whether he wants to continue the relationship to marriage. So that was just all of my thinking in that. But, you know, at the level of voyeurism, and another word that I actually learned looking all of this stuff up was scopophilia.
Yeah.
So can you tell us what scopophilia is?
Yeah, basically it stands for just being fascinated by looking at things and people. And frankly, aren't most psychologists scopophiliacs if that's the case? I mean, we go into it because we're never bored. There's always something to be able to scrutinize and speculate about what's causing people to do what they're doing, even if you're stuck in a line at Walmart. I love the fact that we can entertain ourselves without Facebook. So I think most of what Jeff does would qualify more as that he's a photographer. He's fascinated with the human experience. He wants to plumb that for everything that he can.
Yeah.
And so I think his fascination with the newlywed couple, that starts out, they're eager to get at it. They're it's very clear. They close the blind. They don't want to be seen. But as the movie progresses, wow, that goes downhill. Because it looks
they look like
they're not having fun.
No.
And I think that kind of illustrates Hitchcock's ideas about marriage, potentially, even though supposedly he had a successful marriage. It's clear when he's speaking through Jeff that, I don't know, anybody who turned down Princess Grace, you got to wonder if there's a screw loose there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Maybe he had a lot of hang-ups, I will say, just by listening to him talk about various things. But one thing he did know very well was watching people. And I just want to add that you mentioned psychologists are, scopophiliacs. I can't tell you how many times a prospective student, and I asked them why do you want to be a psychology major? Oh, I really like watching people. I'm a people watcher.
Yeah.
And absolutely, if I'm on vacation, I will go to a coffee shop and just sit there and watch people and just kind of like get a glimpse at their lives. And of course, Jeff here, the photographer, isn't going to just take pictures of his courtyard. He's just going to make observations. And he makes the observation that he hears a woman scream in the middle of the night, he hears a glass break, and he believes this salesman, second floor of the building directly across the courtyard from him, is responsible for something and up into the murder of his wife. So set the stage for us, Jane. Why does Jeff think that Thorwald murdered his wife?
Well, I would guess that he thinks that because there's a kind of a pre-test, post-test. He sees the wife in bed having an argument with Thorwald in the early stages, and then she magically disappears. And there are other things going on that make him think there are clues to the fact that this woman's disappearance is nefarious. The fact that he's leaving, that he's having luggage carted out that potentially could carry a body. The fact that he's digging in the garden in a suspicious way that arouses the curiosity of the neighbor's cute little dog.
Yeah.
There's enough going on that as cause-effect makers, our brains are cause-effect makers,
right.
His deduction process is, oh, that guy's bad. Now let's throw on top of that Thorwald is kind of creepy looking. He's big and burly and clearly unfriendly. You see him yell at somebody. He hasn't gained favor in the neighbor. He's not good in the neighborhood.
Yeah,
so,
he's not. He's almost a persona non grata in that
right.
courtyard, which is a collection of buildings. We'll say that they're not all the same apartment buildings. They're just wrapped around this inner sort of shared communal space, which I think is pretty cool. It sort of contrasts the Astoria. I don't remember what it's called in Only Murders in the Building. That single building in Only Murders in the Building. They have their own courtyard because it's like essentially a square donut or square bagel.
It's kind of like an atrium. So the atrium facilitates exactly what Hitchcock wants us to do, which is he wants us to spy on these people and come up with our own ideas about what's going on in their lives. And we comply.
We do comply. Before I jump into the little the nuggets of psychological concepts here, you mentioned the dog. And unfortunately, this movie is a no watch on doesthedogdie.com because the dog dies. Cute little dog got its neck snapped. Oh my goodness. So when you hear like neck snapped, you are like, oh, Thorwald did it. He's absolutely the only strong person to do this, right? So
I agree. Yeah.
The concepts here that I want to focus on are like the ideas that you mentioned when we were talking about the set, like claustrophobia. Claustrophobia makes us uncomfortable. If there are suspicions, those suspicions can become paranoia if we are uncomfortable. So we are stuck in this loop as we are watching this movie on purpose. And we kind of take as I said, I almost felt like I was in the apartment with Jeff and Lisa. And so when and paranoia can affect more than just people who are undergoing issues with psychosis or near psychosis, right? We can all be paranoid.
Well, let's just take the experience of what we went through with COVID.
Oh, go ahead.
As a country, we were all paranoid. Do you remember the era in which you had to walk in a particular pattern in the grocery store so as not to aggravate and get a lecture from people who thought there was a way to diminish the germ by following a straight? I mean, all of us were paranoid. So certain conditions are likely to produce that. And that factors in, at the time, the country was in the throes of the McCarthy era where...
I didn't make that connection. You're absolutely right. Yeah.
The political context was, it was not just appropriate to look at what people were doing. It's sort of your national duty to be looking out for people who are up to no good.
Right.
And of course, at the time, those were communists.
Yep.
And so if you were able to report that people were doing inappropriate things, there was a sector of the population that thought you were a good, noble American, that was a good thing to do, to root out those communists. So I think that theme really feeds well into what's going on. Was it paranoid, or was it conformity? Was it that we all just decided, okay, this is the way we need to act, and we got to stay away from these people, and we have to walk this way in the grocery store? I mean, we're gonna see episodes like that throughout history, and
right.
The McCarthy era was just a clear exaggeration of it.
Yeah, in the sense that Jeff is the law-abiding citizen and who is 100% capitalist, and Thorwald is the communist, right? He didn't murder anyone. He's just bad enough that he probably was a communist too. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah,
very true.
For that era, I would guess. Yeah.
So we're grabbed in by this suspicion and paranoia, and I'm a biased guy. This is where my research is, and so I tend to spot it in a lot of different places. And I was, with suspicion, you kind of get stuck in a confirmation bias loop.
Yes, you do.
where everything is that you see, you hear, you experience is all in support of the original suspicion that you had. Nothing is unexplainable outside of the confirmation bias and the suspicion.
Yes, we like our personal theories to be very tidy.
Very tidy and very correct, too.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't like being wrong and, of course, have struggles with admitting when they're wrong. So, and we can see this in the movie, too. Like, everything lines up really well for Jeff. He's like creating a story. He's recounting it to both Stella and Lisa. He's trying to get Doyle on his side. Doyle's like that the alibi is working out, that the chest has clothes in it, and it got delivered to the wife, etc., etc.
Hello.
Lieutenant Doyle.
Yeah, it's right here for you.
Hello. Lieutenant Doyle, sir? Speaking. Yeah. All right. I see, thank you. Yes. Goodbye.
Coffee will be ready soon. Jeff, aren't you going to tell him about the jewelry?
Jewelry?
He's got his wife's jewelry hidden in his clothes in the bedroom over there.
You sure it belonged to his wife?
It was in her favorite handbag. And Mr. Doyle, that can only lead to one conclusion.
Namely?
That it was not Mrs. Thorwald that left with him yesterday morning.
You figure that out, eh?
Well, it's simply that women don't leave their jewelry behind when they go on a trip.
Come on, Tom. Now, you don't really need any of this information, do you?
As a matter of fact, I don't. Lars Thorwald is no more a murderer than I am.
And he's like, no, that can't be right, because it doesn't fit his already preconceived idea of the flow of information, how all of these dots connect. He considers himself a sort of modern day Sherlock Holmes. If Sherlock Holmes was, had a broken leg and laid up in his apartment. So with the confirmation bias, he ends up being right, though, doesn't he?
Yes, he does.
Now, you had an interesting comment in our notes doc, and I want you to explain this a little bit more for the listeners. Thorwald is our baddie.
Yeah.
And we don't really hear him speak until the very end of the movie. But there is some interesting lore around Thorwald. You have this image of David O. Selznick.
There was Hitchcock had kind of a weird sense of humor. And so what he did was he took Raymond Burr, who was a very large man, and made him up so that he looked like the head of Paramount Studios, David Selznick at the time. Selznick was supposed to be a little bit of a taskmaster, maybe not the most popular guy.
Bit of a jerk.
And, a bit of a jerk. And I don't know. I don't think I've ever seen anything about how Selznick may have responded to having him caricatured in this way. But when you compare a picture of David Selznick with Thorwald, you go, oh my God, it's so obvious that Hitchcock did that.
Yeah. And the interesting thing about it, and this was probably all part of the plan, is that Paramount released this. This was distributed by Paramount. And so Selznick would have seen a very early and most likely dailies on set.
Yeah,
since he had his fingers in everything. Yeah. So he would have seen Raymond Burr with glasses on very early on in the production.
Exactly the same shape glasses. I mean, I think that talk about a confirmation bias. Like, well, that's got to be it because the glasses are identical. I think that points to maybe some risk taking that Hitchcock felt he could take given his growing popularity. He was
absolutely
in ascendance and making the studio a lot of money, so he could pretty much do what he wanted.
He could, yeah, I agree. So another aspect of the claustrophobia that listeners, I love the notes that Jane prepared for our discussion because she brought pictures, everyone. And of course, I can't show you any pictures.
They're really good, too.
They're really good. Yeah. So the picture, so she just described Raymond Burr as Thorwald and David O. Selznick. And the two pictures are right next to each other. And it's, I mean, it is by film standards, pretty good likeness. Like if you were somebody who was in the industry and saw the film on its release, you were like, oh, that's David O. Selznick. But the other photo I guess it is a photo that Jane brought along about the claustrophobia aspect is a Lego mock-up of the buildings and the courtyard, which I thought was so good. I'm glad somebody decided to make it.
Well, I think it speaks to how creative fans can be when they get possessed by something like who would make a Lego model of a movie set from 1954 unless this movie really spoke to them in some incredibly powerful way. And so there it is.
And while it's not to scale, folks,
no, it's not.
It does highlight just the approach that Hitchcock made or took in making the viewer feel this claustrophobia. Because in the image, the buildings are all very, very, very close to each other. Not at all as high as they need to be, of course, but close enough. And I was reading in the background of the film, and of course the setting and the set making. This set is supposedly outside, or the obviously the courtyard is supposed to be outside, but this entire set was inside.
Yes.
And constructed from basic designs of a Greenwich Village in New York City courtyard of buildings all kind of mashed together. It's not the same address as the actual basis set in the movie, but it is close enough. And as we were talking about at the beginning, like you really get it, like if you're not familiar with how dense people live in cities, New York City, Chicago, even in like places like London or Hong Kong or something like that, people live very close to each other. So if you're from like the rural Midwest, like many of my students are, being that close to people is ridiculous.
Yes.
And so they probably feel the heightened claustrophobia more than somebody who's used to that.
I think that's probably true. And what a good cultural experience and preparation for if they ever go to New York and have to deal with all of that traffic and all those people and the density.
Shoulder to shoulder, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard. I grew up in Los Angeles, and one thing about Los Angeles being a huge city is that it's spread out. There aren't very many places where density is to the point of being like, oh my God, get away from me.
Yeah.
So I don't have that same experience, even growing up in the second largest city in the country. Like it is a completely different world growing up in like Bronx, in all of the boroughs, except for maybe Staten Island, where there are more single family homes.
Well, I think the set really captured the life, but it's also the case that because they had rain scenes, they had to install drainage systems, and the sound systems were kind of state of the art. He did a lot in terms of making the set a legitimate character in the film. Yeah,
and the camera work really does play on that last bit, the character part. I was reading like it was like one of, and I think it still is, got a record for being really well done as far as the drainage system is concerned. Mm-hmm. And there are only like 2 rain scenes, maybe?
Yeah.
All of that just for 2 quick rain scenes. Wonderful attention to detail for a closed set film. Like a when TV shows want to save some money on an episode, they have a bottle show where it's only the main characters, no guest stars, and they kind of just use sets that they already have built instead of making building new ones. And it's like the ultimate bottle movie.
Well, I think the level of detail in the movie is also one of the reasons that I love teaching this in my films class, because we look at attention processes.
Yeah, that's where I was going to go to next.
Is that
Great
right?
segue, Jane.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
So tell us more about these attentional issues.
Well, why do we pay attention to some things and not others? Why is it that Jeff was fascinated more by Miss Torso than, say, Miss Hearing Aid? There are reasons that explain our attention. And when we get bored, we look elsewhere. So the concept of habituation and dishabituation is something that I teach in this context. And ironically, the very first research I ever did as an undergraduate student, I did in infant habituation and dishabituation. And so seeing that concept now illustrated so well in the movie is terrific. But it also reflects something that causes difficulties in my mixed marriage. I love to say that I'm in a mixed marriage. The mix depends on what I'm talking about. In this case, I am notoriously oblivious to change. I do not see change blindness. You could run that gorilla through that group 10 times and I still wouldn't see that gorilla. But my husband is blessed with some sort of weird capacity to detect change. So in movies, that is, can you see the continuity errors? Can you see when the script girl has messed up? The wine now is lower than it should be. Then it's higher than it should be because someone drank and now they've got more wine and nobody, it's that kind of thing.
Right.
And there's actually a website that looks at 18 continuity errors in the film.
Yeah. IMDb has a goofs section for each film. Yeah.
Well, I wouldn't see any of them. You can even point them out to me and I won't see them.
That's what the movie makers want you. They want you, Jane. They don't want your husband.
I'm there. No, here's what my husband does when we're watching movies. He'll go, "Oh, did you see that?" I was like, "I'm watching the movie." And he'll say, "No, look, this helicopter did X, Y, and Z." It's like, what is that? That's not even relevant to the plot. What are you paying attention to? So the mixed is, if you're married to someone who's change sensitive, you should never watch movies with them because it kills the experience. It kills the experience. Takes you right out, breaks that wall.
It's so funny. As he has trouble suspending his disbelief.
He does.
And you have full on disbelief mode.
Totally
activated.
Absorbed. Totally absorbed, whether I'm watching something that's good or terrible. It's like, I'm all in. And then he'll go, "Oh, wait, let me rewind." It's like, "No, don't rewind. Please don't rewind." It's a good thing. It's a good thing. He's cute and I love him in many ways, just not the change blindness.
Yeah, we're not watching this movie together, but we can do something else. So what things would you in this realm would be applicable to the movie?
It would be, when does Jeff decide to stop watching one group and start watching another group?
Okay.
And in particular, there was one scene in which he was supposed to be watching Lisa, but he got distracted by something else. And so that put Lisa in much greater danger because he allowed his attention to slip. And so just being able to follow up with, like, what is it that you pay attention to? How does this translate into your regular life? Students have a lot of fun talking about the relevance of paying attention in a meta way. Like how do I pay attention? What stuff does matter to me? How is it I got to school today and I don't remember driving here?
Everyone.
Well, it's an issue of attention. So it's a nice way to get at under the skin issues with film.
And one of those aspects in the movie is the music.
Yes.
So Jane, tell us a little bit, because I think this information kind of fits with attentional resources and habituation, dishabituation. So what about the music fits this in the movie?
The music is interestingly chosen because for the most part, it's using the popular singers of the day, including some great ones. Nat King Cole, one of my favorites. But the music is rolled out as though you are there listening to the music in the scene as opposed to it being a backdrop.
Right.
And critically, one of the subplots, the musician, is working on a song that he can't get to work, and he plays it over and over and over again, which then adds another sensory dimension to being trapped.
Yep.
Because if you've ever been in those close quarters and had someone playing a song over and over again, you're ready to kill those people, close neighbors. So that added a kind of psychological dynamic to someone who was struggling, that subplot.
Yep.
But in general, I think most music that's used in movies sets the tone and the mood, but the players don't hear the music.
Right.
But in this one, all the players, they're hearing what's going on. They're hearing the music that is being played. It just makes it feel a lot more real, I think.
Yeah, and that kind of music approach is called diegetic music, because
Yes.
it is part of the scene. It is part of the experience that everyone is having, not just the viewers, but the people in the movie. And you bring up a very good point about him just playing it over and over again. But I want to add that the music, generally speaking, gets quieter after a change in dynamic, I want to say. So the music will get loud. So the part that sticks out in my mind here is when the musician has a bunch of people over in his hot little apartment for a social dinner party gathering, and he's there entertaining everyone, and so he's playing the piano, never stopping, this guy. And so he starts to play it. Our attention goes to that window, but it quiets down when our attention focuses to other things that start happening. So whatever happens inside Jeff's apartment, conversation between Jeff and Lisa, the music is quieter. When the musician's not playing, when it's late at night or anything like that, we only have the sounds of the courtyard and the apartments.
Well, there's also the possibility that if you're listening to the musician playing the same song over and over again, you habituate to it and you don't hear it anymore.
Yeah. And I think that's what is happening on the actual soundtrack, which I think is great. It's amazing. It's like a boom mic operator was instructed to pull the mic away from the piano while they were filming. Amazing.
Yeah, I think it just goes to the level of detail that Hitchcock addressed in how he assembled this movie.
Yeah.
At least what I've read about him is that he loved the process of creating the movie, but really hated making the movie. He liked the idea of coming up with the concepts and designing it, but really thought getting it on film was just a torment.
Now, I want you to say a little bit more about that, because you shared some tidbits that I didn't really know about regarding Hitchcock himself, and then his interaction with James Stewart in the making of this movie. So can you say a little bit more, please?
Yeah, Hitchcock had a fairly unpleasant childhood. Apparently, he did something that irritated his parents, and they had him put in jail.
Oh my goodness. That was surprising to read.
It's a little extreme. And Hitchcock reported thereafter that he really had nothing good to say about any police people. And that tends to show up in a lot of the movies that he makes, that the detectives are not as smart or they're incompetent. But he loved making movies about things that he was afraid of. He liked creating a sense of tension for people without actually revealing what was causing the tension. He wanted you to create that challenge in your mind. So even if we talk about the poor little dead dog, by today's standards, we'd see the dog slashed open from top to bottom. You know, that's because the standards have switched so that we're gore seeking. But for him, it was, there's the dog and he's lying flat. And your imagination, when you hear about neck snapping, your imagination takes you where you need to go. He knows that. He knows how to manipulate that. He worked in every capacity, learning the industry from low level to high level. And as he became more successful, he started talking about how much he didn't like actors, which seems a little counterproductive if you're a director, but he said they were mannequins, or he once said they were like cattle, they're like children.
Necessary evils, I suppose.
Necessary evil. And when someone challenged him about the cattle, he said, well, I didn't say they were cattle. I said they should be treated like cattle, which I don't think is an advantage. That doesn't help him out at all. He did love Cary Grant. That was his favorite actor. He also respected Jimmy Stewart. They both appeared in 3 films each of Hitchcock. But apparently on this set, Jimmy was free with criticism, which was a little surprising to me given the mild-mannered character that James Stewart has come to mean for the American public.
Sure.
But was loud with his criticism such that his complaints to Hitchcock could be heard on an entirely different set. It would be that loud. So there were conclusions that Hitchcock may have been a little bit afraid of Stewart, and his relationships with his leading ladies were seriously problematic.
Yeah.
The Hitchcock blonde is kind of classic, that even in the very earliest of his films, I think his first Hitchcock blonde was a woman named Nova Pilbeam. How's that for a name? He simply cast the icy, chilly, cold, beautiful blonde in everything that he did. Grace Kelly was his favorite. She acted in 3 of his films. She reported that he didn't do anything that was especially untoward, but he did require her to change costumes in front of him. It's like, well, I'd call that untoward.
Yeah, I
from the standards of Me Too, I'd call that untoward.
Yeah.
But later on, his attitudes toward his female actors, it was some kind of mix between paternalism and outright exploitation. He would, I don't know if he'd rise to the level of Weinstein, but he certainly would have had a hard time surviving the strategies that he was using that were very exploitive and put some of his actresses at risk. Yeah, so the relationships that he had were, I thought, pretty interesting.
Yeah, and that's just the tip of the iceberg, honestly.
Oh, yeah. It's a big iceberg.
Yeah, because he's got such a revered filmography.
Yes.
Most of his films are, maybe some of his earliest work, less known, but most of his big production movies are some of the greatest in cinema history, and I think worldwide cinema history even.
Yeah, and I think he just has a knack for figuring out how to make you chilled to the bone. I think he probably suffered some pretty serious anxiety stuff and was using films as a way to work that out. And I did find this wonderful quote that is unlike anything I've ever seen. He reported that he was frightened of eggs. They're round without holes. Nothing is more revolting than egg yolk breaking and spilling its yellow liquid. Blood is jolly. It's red. But egg yolk is yellow and it's revolting and I've never tasted it. Now, is that not a bizarre thing to reveal to people? I think really tip of the iceberg. There's a lot going on here.
He's packing.
Here. Get me a pencil. Stella, get this note paper. It's up here someplace. There it is. Pick it up, Thorwald. Come on, you're curious. Come on, you wonder if it's your girlfriend calling, the one you killed for. Go on, pick it up.
Hello?
Did you get my note?
Well, did you get it, Thorwald?
Who are you?
I'll give you a chance to find out. Meet me in the bar at the Albert Hotel. Do it right away.
Why should I?
Little business meeting to settle the estate of your late wife.
I don't know what you mean.
Now, come on, quit stalling, Thorwald, or I'll hang up and call the police.
have only $100 or so.
That's a start. I'm at the Albert now. I'll be looking for you.
One of you keep an eye on this window. If I see him coming back, I'll signal with a flashbulb.
So I want to move on to this last tidbit before we say goodbye, Jane, and that is Jimmy Stewart.
Yes. Oh, Jimmy Stewart.
So you put in the notes, number one favorite actor of all time, right?
Of all time.
Not only one superlative for him, but what I would say 3. Number one favorite of all time.
Yep.
So
I wanted to get that point across.
Exactly.
Absolute
you shared an image in our notes here, and I just want you to if you can indulge me and the audience here, the image, the last image that we'll talk about. What is that image?
Would that be the letter that
Yes.
Jimmy Stewart wrote to my husband?
Mhm.
Yes. We were watching Mr. Smith Goes to Washington probably for the 90th time.
Okay.
One of our favorite films. And for some reason, my husband, who's not normally a fawning kind of guy, said, I'm going to write him a letter because this film has inspired me in ways that I just want to tell him about it. So I said, oh, that's new and different. Go ahead, honey. And he wrote him a letter, and then we got a letter back from Jimmy Stewart.
That's amazing.
It is. And so the letter says, Dear Brian Halonen, I want you to know that I'm very grateful to you for your wonderful letter. I'm sorry this is late in answering. Geez, he even apologized to us. But the letter you wrote is something I'm going to keep. I send you my sincere thanks and God bless you. And so we were stunned to get it. And later, when we were watching another Jimmy Stewart movie where he was writing, we saw that was actually his handwriting. So it was him. It was not an aide writing on his behalf.
Sure.
And why this is especially poignant is in 2013, I had the misfortune of having my damn house burned down.
Mm.
You know, it's not pretty. It's not pleasant. No one should have to go through it. But we lost a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
And fortunately, because of the way this letter was packed, we did not lose the letter. So it's one of those. It was such a glorious present that it somehow it transcended the tragedy that we had.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And you've scanned it now, and it's now in digital form. So it will live as long as the internet does, right?
That's kind of daunting, isn't it? Yes, it will.
Well, I guess we'll see, right? No, but I mean, this is amazing. And when you wrote the letter, where were you and your husband?
I think we were in Wisconsin.
And he was in LA, right? He was. Yeah. Oh, so very, very cool.
Yeah. And I think we had to.
I'm amazed.
We had to track him down. I think we may have been inspired. We saw him appear on the Johnny Carson Tonight Show, and we wrote him by way of Johnny Carson. So we didn't think it would even get to him on that. We didn't know how to get to him back then.
That's amazing.
It is.
With the way that the mail worked.
Yeah.
Back in the day. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, you have an affinity for this movie just because he is in it. And I think that's absolutely fine. I love watching films with my favorite actors. And I'll just say to end the Jimmy Stewart love fest here is It's a Wonderful Life was a very transformational movie for me when I was, I want to say 8, 9, somewhere around there. And I watched it for the first time. It was like a class in 3rd grade, right before we were about to break for Christmas. And I'm like, this guy is really cool. Yeah. So that ended up like, I would consider It's a Wonderful Life starting my film journey.
Oh, that's
and I watched
lovely.
it at school. Like,
yeah,
who would have thunk, right?
Yep.
And so every movie that I watch with him in it, I try to make my Jimmy Stewart impression better every time.
Oh, let's hear it.
Most of it is based on It's a Wonderful Life, where he's, trying really hard to pronounce everything.
That's pretty good.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
He is a little understated, and he speaks more quietly, and he's not as gregarious as Jeff in Rear Window. So, but it's exactly how Jason Sudeikis plays him in the really funny SNL sketch that you mentioned.
Yes.
With January Jones playing Grace Kelly and just farting.
Yeah, a farting January Jones representing one of the world's most gracious women who ever lived.
You're right.
Farting.
Right.
It's hysterical. Loved seeing that.
And so Rear Window came out, like I said, 70 years ago. That SNL sketch is 15 years old.
Mm-hmm.
So, man, time really does fly.
Yes, it does.
Any parting thoughts for the audience, Jen, on the film?
On the film itself, I think it's well worth watching, but do recognize in 2024, we are used to a different pace, but it is designed to produce a particular mood. And if you pay attention to it, you don't do the kind of watching that we're inclined to do now, which is multitasking, checking Facebook, get into it the way the director intended. I think most people would really come away with it with an appreciation of what a great piece of film that really was.
I want to thank Dr. Jane Halonen for joining me to discuss Rear Window. Before we say goodbye, Jane, as I do with all of my guests, is there anything that you'd like to plug, talk about? Where can folks find more about you and the work that you do?
Well, first of all, I can say I discovered I have a Wikipedia page.
That's awesome.
Well, it is awesome when a student tells you I'm making a big speech about don't use Wikipedia. It's not a good source. And they say, but what about what they said about you? I said, what do you mean? I said, you have a page. I said, what do you mean? And sure enough, someone developed a page. So anyone who's really curious, you can wiki me. And it is
Excellent.
accurate, surprisingly accurate. But there are a couple things I would plug. First of all, I am a big fan of podcasting, and I love what Garth and Eric have done with Psych Sessions.
Mm-hmm.
I often participate in that either as a target or a reference or
Right.
an interviewer. And I find those especially interesting ways to get to know the community of psychology. So
Absolutely.
I love getting involved with that. My writing partner, Dana Dunn, and I not only do books together, but we have developed this weird habit of when we get pissed off about something, we write a Chronicle article on how to fix it. and so we often appear in the Chronicle in an advice column. The most recent one we did was how to adjust if you're in a higher administration position where you get fired with no notice because you're serving at the pleasure of. And that was fun to write. And I just vaguely disguised some of the miscreants in my background. Probably what people most know about me, if they pay attention to the community, is that I've been actively involved with APA standard setting for a billion years, it feels like. And we just got the 3rd edition of the guidelines done for undergraduate psychology. I've chaired that group now 3 times.
Awesome.
And this is the last time.
Okay, very good.
Very clear. I'm done.
Yep.
Other people can take over. But there'll be some activities at ACT that amplify what's going on. There'll also be a webcast on the guidelines probably in October, sponsored by APA. And then to kind of bring it full circle, Garth and Eric and I are going to do a kind of shortened version of Top Inc. at ACT.
Okay.
I think it's a 2-hour workshop. So we'd probably be looking for people with that kernel of an idea that you want to expand into something grand. And we'll be happy to work with you on that basis. So that's all I'll plug.
Looking forward to it. Looking forward to seeing where the data on the APA guidelines 3.0 starts showing us, I actually just talked about those guidelines to my research methods class on Friday.
Oh, glad to hear it. Glad to hear it. We love the reports that the penetration is really good.
Yeah.
It's got, I think it's been helpful to people, and I think this new version is even tighter and better. And so I'm proud of the work that I call them the guardians, the task force, the guardians of good psychology.
I think it gives us all over the place really usable strategies and guidelines, obviously, for making sure that wherever you are taking psychology in the country, you and your instructors are following this map that you'll have some of the same skills leaving college that your peers have. So wonderful.
We want students to be able to articulate what they can do because they're a major.
Right.
We have massive public relations problems because people don't understand what we do.
Mm-hmm.
And we can fix that if we are articulate enough to be able to say, here's what I can do with psychology. So the guidelines goes a long way to help that out.
Yeah, I agree. Well, thank you again for joining me, Jane. This was a pleasure.
It was a lot of fun. I appreciate the invitation.
And that's going to do it for this episode. Until the next one, thanks for listening.